This is Freshly Squeezed True Crime, a Florida-only true crime podcast. I'm Suhaili, and before we get to this week's juicy episode, I ask you to visit the website at fstcpodcast.com, where you'll find all of our social media platforms as well as the newest episodes. And also, find us on YouTube, where we'd like you to follow us, subscribe, share it, do all the things. So, pour yourself a tall glass of orange juice, and let me tell you a story. In May 1997, Backstreet Boys released Quit Playing Games with My Heart. While they were new to the States, they were already internationally known. Overall, they had 10 studio albums, 1 live album, 3 compilation albums, 33 music videos, and 31 singles. Their self-titled album went 14 times platinum, the Millennium album went 13 times platinum, and Black and Blue went 8 times, and the hits Chapter 1 time. On April 22, 2013, they received their star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. In January 1998, NSYNC's I Want You Back was released. Again, while it was their first hit in the United States, they were staples internationally. They released 4 studio albums, 3 compilation albums, 25 music videos, 18 singles, 4 DVDs, and 4 tours, and 1 holiday album to include 1 soundtrack. Their self-titled album went 10 times platinum, No Strings Attached 11 times, Celebrity 5, and Home for the Holidays 2. On April 30th, 2018, they received their star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Backstreet and NSYNC became the 2 biggest boy bands in the late 1990s until the early 2000s, and Backstreet Boys went on to become the best-selling boy band in history with over 100 million records sold. So, how did we get here? Lou Pearlman was born on June 19, 1954, and raised in Flushing, New York. The only child of Jewish parents, Hy Pearlman, who ran a dry cleaning business, and Reenie Pearlman, a high school lunchroom aide. He had a fascination for aircrafts, in particular blimps, from a young age. Pearlman's home at Mitchell Garden Apartments was located across the Flushing Airport, where he and his childhood friend, Alan Gross, would watch blimps take off and land. Mitchell Garden Apartments is a collection of 6-story brick buildings on a tiny street. By the way, Flushing is an area in the northernmost reaches of Queens, below the White Stone Bridge. According to his autobiography, Bands, Brands, and Billions, it was during this period that he used his position on his school newspaper to earn credentials and get his first ride in a blimp. This, of course, is disputed by Alan Gross, who claims he was the school reporter and allowed Pearlman to tag along. At the airport, he begged the blimp men to let him take a ride. When they said only special guests and journalists were allowed on board, the 10-year-old wrangled an assignment from his school newspaper, presented as credentials, and was duly lifted into the skies above New York City. A dream was born. The blimps returned to Queens every summer for years, and Pearlman was always there to meet them and helping around the hangars and becoming an unofficial mascot. Quote, I was ecstatic, end quote, Pearlman wrote in his book. Quote, the airport became my summer playground and my after-school hangout, end quote. He also described an idyllic childhood in which he grew up in a kind of miniature Bill Gates, earning money with lemonade stands and paper routes.
Let's talk about a curmudgeon for a second, shall we?
Alan Gross is a 55-year-old census worker in poor health who lives in a kind of Pearlman museum. His apartment is stacked with boxes bursting with Pearlman correspondence, Pearlman news clippings, Pearlman family photos, even tape recordings of a 25-year-old argument the two had over the telephone. A man who has spent years trying to warn investors and government agencies about the kid he knew as, quote, Fat Louie. He goes on to say it was he, not Pearlman, who first glimpsed the blimps that day in 1964. It was he, not Pearlman, who scurried there to befriend the blimp men. He, not Pearlman, who got the press pass necessary to get a ride. He, not Pearlman, who snagged the job of gopher around the blimp's hangar. Quote, the stories he tells, Gross says, they're about me. He's taken episodes from my life to make them his own. He always has. Pearlman was the first cousin of the musician Art Garfunkel. If I have to tell you who that is, you're probably not old enough to listen to this episode. Art Garfunkel's fame and wealth helped inspire Pearlman's own interest in music. As a teenager, he managed a band, but when success in music proved elusive, he turned his attention to aviation. During his first year as president at Queens College, Pearlman wrote a business plan for a class project based on the idea of a helicopter taxi service in New York City. By the late 1970s, he had launched a business based on his business plan, starting with just one helicopter. Some of the best blimps in the world were built by a German company, headed by an industrial named Theodor Wollenkemper. In 1978, when the 24-year-old Pearlman heard that Wollenkemper would be visiting the U.S. around the time of his 50th birthday, he mailed him a 2-foot-high birthday card covered with glitter, along with an invitation to dinner in New York. To Pearlman's amazement, Wollenkemper accepted. Pearlman picked him up at the airport in a helicopter and ferried him to dinner, of all places, apartment 3F in Mitchell Gardens, Flushing, Queens. Pearlman's mother was the host. Wollenkemper, charmed by Pearlman and his enthusiasm to start his own blimp business, invited Pearlman and another Mitchell Gardens friend, Frankie Vasquez Jr., to train at Wollenkemper's facility in Germany. In 1980, returning to the USA, Pearlman formed Airship Enterprises Ltd., which leased a blimp to Jordache before actually owning one. Again, if I have to tell you what Jordache is, you are not old enough and I just aged myself. He used the funds from Jordache to construct the blimp. Quote, he found the balloon materials in California and a contractor in New Jersey. The blimp was assembled at a naval base in Lakehurst, New Jersey, the same one where the German Zeppelin Hindenburg crashed in flames. That should have been a clue. In 1937, from the beginning. Among them, the fact that the gold paint Jordache demanded tended to turn brown after several days in the sun, making the blimp look, in Gross's words, like a giant turd. On its inaugural flight on October 8, 1980, the new Jordache blimp floated into the New Jersey sky on its way to New York Harbor, where it was to circle a promotional party Jordache was throwing. It made less than a mile, however, before losing altitude and forcing the pilot to crash land into a garbage dump. The two parties sued each other, and 7 years later, Pearlman was awarded $2.5 million in damages in 1987. It took years for him to rebound. After moving into a penthouse apartment in Bayside, Queens, however, Pearlman met a Wall Street broker well versed in the market for small, fly-by-night, quote, penny stocks, who proposed a way he could return to the blimp business, go public. Though he had little to sell but an idea, this was the go-go 1980s, and Pearlman's new company, Airship International, managed to raise $3 million in a 1985 public offering, which he used to purchase a 13-year-old blimp from Wollenkemper. In short order, Pearlman secured a promotional contract with McDonald's, falsely claiming that he had a partnership with Wollenkemper, and with his new McDonald's blimp in the air most of the year, he was able to rent office space on Fifth Avenue. In time, Pearlman had enough money to begin flying in a rented Learjet. By 1989, he owned a 6,000 square foot vacation home on a leafy street in Orlando, because Lees are very hard to come by. In the late 1980s, Pearlman began to grow restless after he suffered two profound losses: the 1988 death of his mother and the 1989 destruction of his blimp in San Antonio windstorm. Some suggest he went through an early midlife crisis, maybe at the age of 35. He was just lonely. Whatever happened, Pearlman relocated Airship International to Orlando, Florida in July 1991, where he signed MetLife, Gulf Oil, SeaWorld, and more as clients for his blimps. But like most of his businesses, there were allegations of pump and dump. He began talking about getting into the music business. Sometime after that, and at least before 1989, Pearlman founded Transcontinental Airlines, and later its parent company, Transcontinental International Incorporated. But Transcontinental Airlines only existed on paper and didn't actually own any planes, leasing them from others. Transcontinental International would become the heart of his Ponzi scheme. According to Dun & Bradstreet, Transcon Air operated more than 49 crafts, including 14 727s, and had annual revenues of $78 million. After airline enterprises continued to flounder, Pearlman remembered the time he rented a plane for the New Kids on the Block. Fascinated by their success, Pearlman decided he wanted to replicate it and create a group of his own. But in the meantime, Airship International suffered when one of its clients left and 3 of the aircrafts crashed. The company's stock which was once being pumped up to a whole $6 a share, dropped to a price of 3 cents a share, and the company was shut down. Also in 1988, Pearlman became personally and professionally close to Jerome Rosen, a partner at a small-cap trading firm, Norbay Securities. Based in Bayside, Queens, New York, and frequently in trouble with regulators, Norbay actively traded airship stock. This sent airship stock's price consistently higher, enabling Pearlman to sell hundreds of thousands of shares and warrants at even higher prices. However, airship was reported little revenue, cash flow, or net income. In return for keeping his penny stock liquid, Pearlman allegedly paid Rosen handsome commissions, according to a mutual friend, that reached into the tens of thousands of dollars per trade. Pearlman also hired Anthony DeCamelis, a broker who had been banned for a year from the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, and fined $25,000 to help raise still more money for TransCon from banks and private investors. So clearly, raising money was not the issue. The real problem was Pearlman's spending. He and his men hired private jets and helicopters for every business trip. Every meal seemed to be a dozen people on the company's tab, a habit that drove up not only Pearlman's expenses, but his weight, which hit 316 pounds and may have gone up to as high as 350. He was unbelievably fat. He used to sit down and his middle tire was down to the floor, recalls Jennifer Emanuel, one investor's daughter. His favorite place was that all-you-can-eat buffet at Olive Garden. Remember those days? God, I missed them. I remember sitting his guys down and saying, "Look, at this rate, you'll go through this 17 million in no time," said investor and president of Skyship Services, Julian Beckner. So Pearlman raised more money. He had been gathering small amounts from family and friends, mostly in the New York area, but in the early 1990s, he aggressively began soliciting outside investors. Some, such as the late Eric Emanuel, a Wall Street investment banker, were sophisticated. Emanuel ponied up several $1,000,000 and persuaded a Long Island real estate mogul, Alphonse Fugellini, to do the same. Many others weren't as savvy. Dr. Joseph Chow, a Chicago engineering professor whose wife ran a successful long-term care organization, entered Pearlman's orbit when a Sheffield Dean broker cold called him. Pearlman took it from there, and later Chow came to consider Pearlman the son he never had, and eventually lent him more than $14 million. Typical of Pearlman's investors was the Sarin family. Stephen, a Manhattan dentist, his brother Barry, and their parents began investing with Pearlman after the elder Sarins heard someone in the Florida retirement community speaking glowingly of Pearlman. Pearlman began offering investors a new option, a chance to participate in TransCon Air's federally insured employee stock ownership plan, what he deemed as an employee investment savings account, or EISA. TransCon's EISA, which paid an annual return of about 8%, was a rock-solid investment, Pearlman said, guaranteed by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, the giant American International Group AIG insurance company, and the Lloyd's of London. In time, Pearlman began selling EISA investments through a series of small brokerage houses in Florida. Many of his buyers were retirees. There was just one problem. Neither the Sarins investments nor those of Dr. Chow or any other Pearlman investors were actually guaranteed by the FDIC or AIG or Lloyd's of London. It was all a lie. In 1999, Lloyd's caught wind of it and fired off a letter to Pearlman demanding that he stop. He said it was all a misunderstanding. Lloyd's went to the SEC. There is no evidence the agency followed up on the complaint. For the most part, investors simply took Pearlman at his word. When someone did ask to see proof of AIG and FDIC backing, Pearlman invited them to his office and displayed what appeared to be a massive AIG insurance policy, as well as a letter confirming FDIC protection. According to Bob Purserant, a Tampa lawyer representing 15 Pearlman investors, the AIG policy was unrelated and the FDIC letter a fake, believed to be dummied up by Pearlman himself. The bigger lie, though, was the simplest. There is no such thing as an EISA account. There is a legitimate federally insured vehicle called the URSA, an employee retirement investment savings account, but according to Percent and others, Pearlman's fictitious EISA accounts were nothing more than a transparent attempt to capitalize on confusion between the two names. It was a strangely simple and fabulously successful con. Between the early 1990s and 2006, Pearlman took in more than $300 million in EISA sales. In fact, the state of Florida alleges it was a straightforward Ponzi scheme. Pearlman paid old investors with money from the new ones. What he told people was that I've got this EISA plan, and normally these plans are restricted to employees, but I've built in a special clause that allows me to give it to friends and family. The genius was that he promised only a point above prime or so people never got suspicious. There is negligible evidence that Pearlman and many others knew the extent of his frauds. Only way Pearlman protected himself was hiring inexperienced people. In a business that rarely numbered more than a few dozen employees, several top Pearlman aides, including both his general counsel and his last right-hand man, Robert Fischetti, began their careers as Pearlman's drivers. Fischetti's earliest duties, one investor recalls, included handing out paper towels in a Transcon's men's bathroom. Pearlman found another of his top men, Paul Russo, working at a convenience store. None of these guys knew anything, remembers Jay Morose. If you needed a decision made, they would listen to you and go, and then go to Lou. Now this is a part of the episode where I need you to close your eyes and picture it. 1988. 10-year-old me laying in bed, listening to my clock radio when Please Don't Go Girl gently drifts into my ears. Several months later, my heart again once jumped out of my chest when the song You Got It, The Right Stuff was released. By the time I'll Be Loving You, Didn't I? Blow Your Mind This Time, and Hanging Tough, NKOTB had a strong chokehold on me and my mother's budget. Yes, the New Kids on the Block. Overall, NKOTB had 3 number ones, 9 top 10s, and 13 overall on the Billboard Hot 100. As of 2020, they are worth $98 million. And before you ask, my favorite NKOTB member, also the cutest and most talented, was Jordan, baby daddy Jordan. Last stat I promise, because I am super fangirling, their biggest selling hit song of all time is also my favorite song, Step by Step. Okay, there is a tie-in coming. Pearlman became fascinated with the success of the New Kids on the Block, who had made hundreds of millions of dollars in records, tours, and merchandise sales. I know, they were all in my room. He started Transcontinental Records with the intent of mimicking their boy band model success. In 1992, he placed an ad in the Florida Blue Sheets. Blue Sheets are a leaflet for up-and-coming musicians and entertainers in the area for 5 young male singers in the area to audition for a music group he was putting together. The record label's first band, the Backstreet Boys, consisted of 5 unknown performers selected by Pearlman and named after a teen hangout in Orlando called the Backstreet Market. Pearlman sank $3 million into Backstreet before he saw a penny of profit. Still, the music business thrilled him. Management duties were assigned to a former New Kids on the Block manager, Johnny Wright, and his wife, Donna. The Backstreet Boys became the best-selling boy band of all time, with record sales of 130 million, hitting gold, platinum, and diamond in 45 countries. In 1995, Pearlman was thinking about creating another survival of the Backstreet Boys. Pearlman acknowledged that another group would come along anyways, and he decided to create it himself, saying, "Where there's McDonald's, there's a Burger King, and when there's Coke, there's Pepsi, and when there's Backstreet, there's going to be someone else." Chris Kirkpatrick, who missed the cut for the Backstreet Boys and was unaware of Pearlman's ulterior motives, asked if he could create another group that he could be in. Pearlman told him that if he could find another member of Pearlman would finance the group. Ultimately, this other group was created. You may know them as NSYNC. The Backstreet Boys were hurt by this betrayal. Pearlman and the Wrights funded and managed NSYNC in a very similar fashion, selling over 70 million records globally. With these 2 major successes under his belt, Pearlman had become a music mogul, while Pearlman's blimp business began to fail. Pearlman was soon spending so much time on the music business, he lost all interest in the blimps, and as a result, Airship International went down in flames. The company posted a $2 million loss in 1992 and a $4 million loss in early 1994. By late 1994, its stock had fallen to 13 cents a share, down from $6. Of its 5 blimps, only one was still flying in late 1994. The SeaWorld blimp was dismantled after the park declined to renew its lease. Another lease to promote a Pink Floyd tour was damaged in a windstorm. Yet another crashed in North Carolina. Yet another, en route to the U.S. Open tennis tournament in September 1994, crashed into Long Island's man's front yard. The end came when the lease on Pearlman's last blimp expired in 1995. Pearlman's investors didn't care much about Airship's death. Most, like Pearlman, were too excited about the music ends of the business. But what made many investors feel secure was the knowledge that even with Airship gone, the second and far larger leg of Pearlman's empire, the 80 million transcontinental airlines, was thriving. Its income grew steadily through the 1990s. In fact, almost all of Pearlman's ventures became subsidiaries of Transcon Air. The Backstreet Boys, the Chippendales, the male stripper franchise, which he acquired in 1996, Transcon Records, Transcon Studios, and even Transcon Foods, which included a string of TCBY yogurt franchises and a small chain of pizzerias called NYPD Pizza. Pearlman regularly mailed out glowing letters to Transcon Air shareholders detailing how the aircraft leasing and other businesses were going. He varied his talents to include other boy bands like O-Town, created during the ABC MTV reality television show Making the Band, LFO, Take 5, Natural, Marshall Dillon, co-created with country music artist Kenny Rogers, and US5, as well as the girl group Solid Harmony and Innocence, with Britney Spears in a very, very beginning of a short-term member. All were co-managed by Lynn Harless, the mother of NSYNC's band member Justin Timberlake. They were all on the rise. Other artists on the Transcontinental label included Aaron Carter, Jordan Knight, Smiles, and South Star and C-Note. With money pouring in from investors, Pearlman began working on a state-of-the-art recording studio. When it was finished, artists as varied as Kenny Rogers and the Bee Gees would record there. Once they signed, Lou Pearlman enacted a boy band boot camp. When Pearlman signed NSYNC, he got them a house, told them they could quit their jobs and put them through a boot camp in unconditioned airplane hangars. It was the same for the Backstreet Boys, with the guys rehearsing 6 to 8 hours daily in the sweaty hangars. Agent McLean says, "We were working our butts off day in and day out, and man, was it hot those first Florida summers." "I'm surprised none of us got heat stroke," said Kirkpatrick, but he admits it worked. As repetitive and annoying as it got, it was fun. But when they hit 10 million records, the numbers, they just didn't add up. After 3 years of endless touring and promoting their album, the members of NSYNC got their first checks at a fancy dinner party with Pearlman and their families. The amount they received was shocking. "I opened up the envelope, I see the check, and oh my gosh, my heart sank," said Lance Bass. "I couldn't believe the number I was looking at. The check was for $10,000. And not to sound ungrateful, but when you compare it to how many hours we have put into this group for years, it didn't even touch minimum wage at all." Agent McLean says the Backstreet Boys, who were selling out stadiums and arenas at the time, noticed they were being stiffed too, recalling, quote, "Some of the guys couldn't pay for their car payments or couldn't pay for their apartments." NSYNC's Jay-Z Saze added, "Basically, we thought it was a normal thing to get food money, and then we thought essentially at the end of the road there would be some magical big checks." Their contracts were webs of robbery. After 3 years of non-stop work and tens of millions of record sales, in December 1998, he invited the 5 singers and their families to an expensive restaurant to officiate over the ceremony, where they would each receive their share of their vast fortune their career had generated so far. Until then, the members of NSYNC had lived on an allowance of $35 per day. They were giddy with the prospect that they were about to become instant millionaires. They held their collective breaths and savored the moment when their lives would be changed forever, stretching out their eager hands to receive a check for, as previously mentioned, $10,000 each. The floor fell away from beneath them. They then learned that they had been picking up the bills the entire time against their future profits. Quote, Lou was making it seem like we were in so much debt that it would be a long time before we saw real money, says Lance Bass. Then, Chazé brought Instinct's contracts to his lawyer uncle, who identified, quote, webs of robbery. Kirkpatrick says, for example, Pearlman identified himself as a member of the band, allowing him to reap a sixth of the band's profits. Though Justin Timberlake doesn't appear in the boy band con, his mom, Lynn Harless, talks about the moment she realized her son was being robbed by Pearlman. Quote, every parent is protective of their child. Like everyone else, I just wanted to kill him. Lance Bass explains if Pearlman had given them each $100,000 instead of $10,000 at that fateful dinner, it definitely would have prolonged his business with us. Pearlman also owns a large entertainment complex in Orlando, including a record studio he called Transcontinental Studios, a dance studio near Disney World named O-Town, and an airline, a film studio, talent and travel agency, restaurants, real estate, and a recording company. In 2002, Pearlman and Wes Smith co-wrote Bands, Brands, and Billions, My Top 10 Rules for Making Any Business Go Platinum. With the exceptions of Us Five and Marshall Dillon, all the musical acts that worked with Pearlman sued him in federal court for misrepresentation and fraud. All cases against Pearlman either have been won by those who have brought the lawsuits against him or have been settled out of court. The members of Backstreet Boys were the first to file a lawsuit against Pearlman, feeling that their contract, under which Pearlman collected as both manager and producer, was unfair because Pearlman was also the paid sixth member of the Backstreet Boys. The band's dissatisfaction began when member Brian Littrell hired a lawyer to determine why the group had received only $300,000, $12,000 per member, for all the work, while Pearlman and his record label had made millions. Fellow boy band member NSYNC was having similar issues with Pearlman, and its members soon followed a lawsuit. Pearlman and the bands eventually reached a series of settlements, details of which were never disclosed. In general, the band got cash and its freedom. Pearlman retained a portion of its future revenues. The lawsuits didn't stop there with the bands. The Backstreet Boys' first manager sued. Artist Phoenix Stone sued. Before you know it, Pearlman ran up to $15 million in legal bills in 1 year, but because of royalty interests in both of the biggest boy bands on the planet, he was swimming in cash. He bought a 12,000 square foot lakeside mansion in suburban Windermere, along with 2 condos in Orlando, a waterfront in Clearwater, 2 Las Vegas penthouses, a house in Hollywood, and an apartment in Manhattan. Oh, and 2 Rolls Royces. The slowing of boy band craze in 2001 and 2002, however, meant Pearlman needed new income streams to keep paying his investors. He signed a slew of new artists, but none other than Nick Carter's brother, Aaron, a solo act, had any real success. Pearlman tried to break into Hollywood, developing a script titled Long Shot, written by Tony DeCamillis, the once band stockbroker. As it starts, Pearlman casts one of his singers, a teenager named Joey, more than a dozen transcon artists, and Britney Spears, The Rock, and Justin Timberlake in a series of cameos. Released in 2002, Long Shot was a complete flop. According to one source, the movie cost $21 million and barely brought in $2 million. At the age of 14, Aaron Carter filed a lawsuit in 2002 that accused Pearlman and Transcontinental of cheating him out of hundreds of thousands of dollars and of racketeering in a deliberate pattern of criminal activity. This suit was later settled out of court. While Pearlman's celebrity dimmed, he remained a star in Orlando, where he had given a key to the city and named an honorary sheriff's deputy. In 2003, he used his goodwill to strike a deal with the city council to assume control of the Church Street Station complex, a cluster of historic buildings in downtown Orlando. Promising to refurbish the complex and create 500 jobs, Pearlman relocated all his businesses there, and despite construction delays, the opening of several restaurants and stores in the next several years slowly brought Church Street back to life. In September 2002, Pearlman purchased Mark Tollner's internet-based talent company Options Talent Group, formerly Amato and Studio 58, which would subsequently go through several names including Transcontinental Talent. Do you see a fucking pattern? Wilhelmina Talent Scouting, Webstyle Network, Fashion Rock, and Talent Rock. Regardless of the name, all incarnations were based on the model used by E-Model founder Eamon Alec Dwarfel, himself a convicted con artist, who played a principal role in running Options, TCT, and WSNN, and setting up Fashion Rock. The companies received unfavorable press attention, ranging from questions about their business practices to outright declarations that they were scams. After Hot Jobs and Monster.com, remember them, pulled over 1,000 of their company's job ads from their boards, they were further advertised on the Dwarfy-founded Industry Magazine website. The Better Business Bureau's opinion about TCT was negative, citing a pattern of complaints concerning misrepresentation and selling practices. The New York State Consumer Protection Board issued an alert, naming it the largest example that had been found of a photo mill scam. A photo mill is a modeling agency scam. The scamming agency, rather than allowing models to submit photos from their own photographers, requires models to pay for photos taken by a photographer employed by the agency. Models are often charged outrageous prices for these photos and encouraged to buy more than they actually need. After the money is collected, the agency rarely finds work for the models. San Francisco Labor Commissioner declared TCT in violation of California law, and several state agencies were reported to be investigating the company. In Florida, around 2,000 complaints were filed with the then Attorney General Charlie Crist and the Better Business Bureau, and an investigation was started by the Assistant Attorney General Dowd. However, as the newly appointed Assistant AG McGregor was unable to find, quote, any substantial violations, no charges were filed. Further complicating matters was the fact that the company had since declared bankruptcy, quote, leaving no deep pockets from which to collect damages, end quote. By June 2004, Fashion Rock LLC had filed a civil suit for defamation against some who had criticized Pearlman's talent businesses. The case was dismissed and closed in 2006. One of the accused, a Canadian consumer fraud expert, Les Henderson, successfully pursued a libel lawsuit against Pearlman, Tollner, Dwarfy, and several others. Fashion LLC lived on until February 2, 2007, when its assets were sold in Pearlman's bankruptcy proceedings. Dwarfy continued filing lawsuits that were all dismissed and was most recently running Expand Inc., doing business as softrock.org, aka Employer Network, from the same address as the former Transcontinental Talent Agency. So, let's talk about this Ponzi scheme again, shall we? By 2004, Pearlman had yet to find anything to replace the income loss from Airship International, NSYNC, and the Backstreet Boys. He continued pumping out new singing groups, including a Latin boy band and a Euro boy band named Us Five, but none caught fire. Yet his hundreds of investors still needed to be paid. In time, he faced the squeeze every Ponzi scheme ultimately confronts: where to find new cash to pay for old investors. In 2003, with his cash crunch growing worse by the month, he began taking out bank loans, because that's safe, right? In the next 3 years, in 13 separate loan packages, Pearlman pledged every asset he possessed in return for cash: the condominiums, the mansion, Church Street, his 3 airplanes, even his share of boy band royalties. In return, he received about $156 million. Just as important, he gained time. The mind-boggling thing is that not one of Pearlman's new banks discovered that the emperor had no clothes. Not one realized that his largest asset by far, Transcontinental Air, didn't even exist. No one realized that his financial statements and his tax returns were just tissues of lies. In hindsight, these deceptions should have easily been discerned. All it would have taken was a single phone call to Harry Milner, the attorney who signed Pearlman's return. Milner wouldn't have come to the phone. A Ponzi scheme for those who don't know, is a form of fraud that lures investors and pays profits to earlier investors with funds for more recent investors. Named after Italian businessman Charles Ponzi, the scheme leads victims to believe that profits are coming from legit businesses, for example, profit sales, or a successful investment, and they remain unaware that other investors are the source of the funds. A Ponzi scheme can maintain the illusion of a substantial business as long as the new investors contribute new funds, and as long as most of the investors do not demand full repayment and still believe in the non-existent assets they were purported to own. For Pearlman, the beginning of the end came in mid-2004 when 72-year-old Joseph Chow succumbed to pancreatic cancer in a Chicago hospital. Over the years, Chow had become Pearlman's dream investor, a virtually unlimited source of money, with total faith in Pearlman's promises of future riches. When Joseph Chow died, a large bill for estate taxes had an uncle approach Pearlman about repaying the loans. He told the uncle that he would think about it and try to work out a payment plan. Lou said he could repay $100,000 every quarter or so until the full $14 million was paid down. Filed in late 2004, the centerpiece of Pearlman's lawsuit to the Chow family was what's called a forbearance letter. In this case, a one-paragraph note signed by Joseph Chow saying, in essence, that his loans could be forgiven if Pearlman didn't feel like repaying. However, an investigator realized he was looking at a forgery. It would take another year, however, to gather the original documents, hire experts, and to prove it. To study Pearlman's finances, Edwin Brooks, the Chow's attorney, subpoenaed the accounting firm that had certified his financial statements. The firm's name was Cohen and Siegel. It was the same firm that had been furnishing Pearlman's statements since at least 1990. But when Brooks dispatched a process server to the firm's Coral Gables headquarters, the process server calls back and says, "There's no accounting firm at this address, just a secretary of service." Brooks recalls, at which point I realized I was onto something. Brooks deposed a woman who ran the secretarial service. She said Cohen and Siegel had no offices or employees that she knew of. Pearlman had simply paid her to take calls on his behalf. When a call came in, she forwarded it to Pearlman herself. "He paid for the whole thing," Brooks said. "I realized there was no accounting firm." Not long after, Brooks discovered a Cohen and Siegel website, apparently a new one. Quote, "Lou claimed it was a German accounting firm, but it was a joke. It had no contact information. We hired investigators to find it. It didn't exist." By the middle of 2005, the Chow family and its attorney had solid evidence Pearlman had perpetrated a massive fraud. Other investors, however, knew nothing of this and continued to shovel money Pearlman's way. He needed it bad. By 2006, few, if any, of his remaining businesses, a handful of obscure talent rock, Planet Airways, the recording studio, the Delays, and a few restaurants, were making any money. Yet Pearlman, thanks to bank loans, kept mailing interest checks to hundreds of investors. He was able to borrow from an Indiana bank as late as August 2006, but by then, he was all but broke. Soon after, investors stopped receiving their checks. That September, Stephen Sarin, the dentist, heard rumors of the Chow family's litigation. Sarin's family had given Pearlman so much money, $12 million in total, that he still lived in a studio apartment, awaiting the day Pearlman went public. When Sarin telephoned, Pearlman dismissed the Chow litigation as a mix-up. A few weeks later, he went to Queens and met Stephen Sarin and his brother Barry at their usual spot, Ben's Deli in Bayside. Barry demanded his money back. Quote, "Lou said, 'No problem. I can pay you back with one hubcap from my Rolls Royce.' He showed us a financial statement showing us where we were doing phenomenal. He told us Transcon had 60 jets. It was only after the meeting was over I remembered I noticed for the first time in 22 years he didn't use a credit card for his meal. He paid in cash." The Sarins would never see their money again, nor would many of Pearlman's aides, including Frankie Vasquez Jr., who had been at his side since boyhood. Vasquez's father had been the super at Mitchell Gardens. In early November, when Vasquez sought to withdraw a portion of the $100,000 or so he had with Pearlman, quote, "Lou told him he was on his own. The money was gone. After all the years Frankie had devoted to Lou, he turned his back on him. Frankie, I knew, felt totally betrayed. Afterward, Ridgway states, Vasquez grew distraught. He couldn't sleep. On November 11th, a neighbor heard a car running for several hours in the garage. Police were called. Opening the garage, they found Vasquez sitting in a white 1987 Porsche, the motor running, a t-shirt wrapped around his head. He was dead. In 2006, investors discovered Pearlman had perpetrated the longest running and largest Ponzi scheme in American history up until that point and had defrauded investors out of more than $1 billion, out of which $300 million is still missing. For more than 20 years, Pearlman had enacted individuals and banks to invest in Transcontinental Airlines, Transcon Records, and both company parents, Transcontinental International Inc. All three companies were fictitious, that existed only on paper, at least until Lou Pearlman's boy bands took off and Transcon Records was profiting from signed acts. After the success of NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, he turned the groups and their fame into the engine to further expand his Ponzi scheme. Pearlman used falsified FDIC, AIG, and Lloyd's of London documents to win investors' confidence in his program titled Employees Investment Savings Account, and he used fake financial statements created by fictitious accounting firm Cohen & Siegel to secure bank loans. The state of Florida's Office of Financial Regulation began examining Transcon's EISA program after investors started complaining in the fall of 2006. Pearlman did his best to delay state auditors, but when word of the probe leaked to the press in mid-December, he knew the end was near. According to one report, he attempted to buy an apartment in Berlin, but the purchase fell through. He began selling or giving away his automobiles, including a Rolls-Royce, and laying off Transcon employees. He stopped paying his banks, and they began to sue. Every day last January seemed to bring a new lawsuit. Just days before the state filed its own lawsuit charging Pearlman with operating a Ponzi scheme, a group of banks petitioned an Orlando judge to place Transcon into bankruptcy. An attorney named Jerry McHale was assigned to begin liquidating Pearlman assets. In February 2007, it was announced that Pearlman's Transcontinental Savings Program was indeed a massive fraud, and the state took possession of the company. He owed his investors $96 million, but had less than $15,000 in the bank. The investigation found that Pearlman's records neglected to show the more than $38 million he had withdrawn for himself and his companies. Orange County Circuit Judge René Roche ordered Pearlman and two of his associates, Robert Fischetti and Michael Crudelli, to be brought back to the United States and, quote, any assets taken abroad which would derive from the illegal transactions. By the time McHale entered Transcon's offices on February the 2nd, there had been no sign of Pearlman for weeks. The situation was a disaster, McHale recalls. There were actually no employees left when I arrived. It appeared that everyone was aware that this thing was falling apart and had just left. That same day, Pearlman wrote an email to the Orlando Sentinel from Germany, where the night before he and his band, US5, had attended an industry awards show. While declining to comment on the allegations against him, he said, quote, my executive team and I are working hard to resolve the issues. It was over. In mid-February, the FBI and the I raided Pearlman's mansion, hauling out counts of documents and quizzing his assistant when he drove up in Pearlman's last Rolls, a bright blue model with LP license plates. At the same time, Jerry McHale gained entrance to Pearlman's office computers and realized the enormity of the scandal. All told, McHale identified $317 million in missing money that was supposed to be Transcon's EISA accounts, not to mention the $156 million in vanished bank loans. There was no money left. McHale got busy selling Pearlman's remaining real estate and his last functioning business, Talent Rock, for next to nothing. His only real success came when he received an anonymous tip that Pearlman, wherever he was attempting to transfer $250,000 from an account at the Bank of New York to Germany. McHale managed to get the money frozen before it even left the United States. He fled the country, but over the course of time, he had been reported being seen in Israel, Belarus, Brazil, Russia, Spain, Panama, and even Germany. This motherfucker was like Carmen Sandiego, am I right? Except one super sleuth by the name of Thorsten Iborg. You see, Iborg was a 32-year-old German computer programmer who arrived on the Indonesian island of Bali on June 9th with his wife for a scuba vacation. Can you imagine that fucking life? After a day or two, he noticed a pale, overweight American on the terrace. Really, that shit could have been anybody. Back in Germany, he had seen a news clip about boy bands and he was certain the man was Pearlman. Later, Iborg found himself sitting beside the man in the hotel's internet cafe. It was him, he was sure. At breakfast on June 14th, Iborg secretly snapped a photo of the man. Scanning the internet, he found a blog written by St. Petersburg, Florida newspaper reporter Helen Huntley, not to be confused with Helen Hunt. He uploaded the photo and emailed it to Huntley. She turned everything over to the FBI. What a fucking hater, am I right? Pearlman was arrested in Indonesia on June 14, 2007. He was living in a tourist hotel in Nusa Dua, Bali. U.S. Marshals loaded him up into a plane to Guam, where he remained in jail for nearly a month before being returned to Orlando in mid-July. Pearlman was indicted by a federal grand jury on June 27, 2007. Specifically, Pearlman was charged with 3 counts of bank fraud, 1 count of mail fraud, and 1 count wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and filing false bankruptcy. 5 days before his sentencing in May 2008, Pearlman requested a telephone and an internet connection 2 days a week to continue to promote bands. Federal Judge Kendall Sharp of the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Florida rejected the request. On May 21, 2008, Judge Sharp sentenced Pearlman to 25 years in prison on all of the aforementioned charges. Pearlman could reduce his prison time by 1 month for every $1 million he helped the bankruptcy trustee recover. He also ordered individual investors to be paid before institutions in distributing any eventual assets. Pearlman and his companies were forced into involuntary bankruptcy in March 2007. Trustees and lenders intended to auction off Pearlman's assets and personal belongings, including a mansion full of well-known works of art and priceless memorabilia. They quickly discovered the art and memorabilia was mostly fake. What could be sold was auctioned through eBay and a traditional bankruptcy auction house. Church Street Station, the historic train station in downtown Orlando, which Pearlman had purchased in 2002, was sold as bankruptcy auction in April 2007 for $34 million. Several of Pearlman's belongings, including his college degrees, were purchased by the AV Club journalist and the film critic Nathan Rabin during the eBay auction. In 2009 interview with Howard Stern, Richard Cronin, the former lead singer of the LFO bands, who died in 2010, said that he had only received a fraction of the money owed to him from record sales. Cronin claimed that Pearlman had, quote, wanted to bang everyone, end quote, and had attempted to seduce him on multiple times. Cronin was of age. He claimed that Pearlman asked the group to fondle his penis as, quote, practice for meetings with German music executives, though it was not suggested any of them ever did. Jiki de la Roche of Innocence, Pearlman's only girl band, claims that he covertly filmed them naked on the sunbed at his house to show members of his boy bands as part of a bizarre bonding ritual that, quote, felt really pretty darn violating. Fellow LFO band members Brad Fichitti, however, continued to refer to Pearlman as a friend and expressed sadness at the news of his arrest, imprisonment, and later on death. Nick Carter, when asked if the claim was true, suggested that bitterness might be a motivating factor for the claim. In an interview conducted by the Orlando Sentinel, former NSYNC member Lance Bass, when asked about the claim, stated that Pearlman had never behaved inappropriately with them. Ashley Parker Angel of O-Town said Pearlman would offer unsolicited massages and inspect their abs. However, Aaron Carter forcefully defends Pearlman in a documentary by stating, quote, my opinion of Lou being a sexual predator is that it's not true, that this is just so foul. It hurts me to see people continuously attack him, end quote. Tim Christopher, who joined Pearlman's third boy band, Take 5, at the age of 13, remembers one sleepover when he and another boy were dozing and Pearlman appeared at the foot of their bed, clad in only a towel. According to Christopher, who now runs a small entertainment business in St. Paul, Minnesota, Pearlman performed a swan dive into the bed, wrestling with the boys, and at which point the towel came off. But his mother, Jane Carter, told Vanity Fair in 2007 that the financial scandal is the least of the injustices. Allegations of Pearlman making inappropriate overtures towards members of his group, especially to the youngest member of BSB, began in late 1990s. Vanity Fair's 2007 investigation a decade later is the most comprehensive. Several artists and family members went on to record, recalling a wide swath of questionable actions, ranging from Pearlman exposing himself to watching porn with the boys. None of the men who have been rumored to have had coerced into sexual acts with Pearlman, though, have gone on record. Quote, none of these kids will ever admit anything happens, end quote. One attorney who has sued Pearlman told Vanity Fair, quote, they're all too ashamed, and if the truth came out, it would ruin their careers. Only later did Mary Goldell, who had 2 sons in Take 5, learn that Pearlman had taken one to a strip joint. Did Lou rape my son? No, he didn't, but he put them and a lot of others in inappropriate situations. I know that. To me, that man is a sexual predator. By the way, Justin Timberlake has rarely spoken about Pearlman, although his mother, Lynn Harless, appears humanizing Pearlman. Quote, I think deep down in his heart, that's what he, Lou, really wanted to be. The 6th member of the group. I think he wanted those boys to see him that way too. And if he hadn't taken advantage of them, they would have. To this day, the question of Pearlman's behavior remains a sensitive topic amongst many of the former members of his boy bands. For every young man or parent who says he experienced or saw something inappropriate, there are 2 who won't discuss it, and 3 who more than deny hearing anything but rumors. More than a dozen insiders have quoted as stating that Pearlman's behavior, while insisting they experienced nothing untoward themselves. Asked who might have been targets of Pearlman's overtures, the names of 7 or 8 performers are repeatedly mentioned. Only 2 of these men would talk to the reporter, and while one acknowledges hearing stories from other boys of inappropriate behavior, both strenuously deny experiencing it for themselves. The Vanity Fair article in 2007 alludes to a ton of other allegations, but I wanted to focus on the actual charges brought up against him, not the allegations that were never corroborated. In 2008, Pearlman began his prison sentence with a projected release date of March 24, 2029. However, he suffered a stroke in 2010 while incarcerated. He was diagnosed with an infection of a heart valve. Pearlman had surgery to replace the heart valve a few weeks before his death. The prison took him to a hospital where he has scheduled for another surgery. While he claimed to the Hollywood Reporter in 2014 that the stroke made him turn his health around, Pearlman ultimately died while still in custody at the Federal Correctional Institution in Miami on August 19, 2016, from cardiac arrest. He was buried 10 days later on August 29, 2016, in the family burial area. He was 62 years of age. Lance Bass spoke about Pearlman's death 3 years later, saying it left him, quote, confused. Quote, when I heard that Lou Pearlman had passed away, I was so confused on exactly how to feel. I was like, how could you die right now when you don't have this closure? You need to apologize. Like there are so many people who are waiting for you to realize what you did. He said to an interview according to USA Today, and quote, it pissed me off that he passed away. The many other deaths. Pearlman is not the only death in this episode. 3 of the 4 members of LFO have passed. Richard Cronin, who I mentioned earlier, passed away on September 8, 2010, after a stroke while battling leukemia. David Lima, November 21, 2018, as a battle with his adrenal cancer. And Brian Gillis, March 30, 2023, as a result of a heart attack. Aaron Carter was found unresponsive on November 5, 2022. It was discovered he had been taking alprazolam and inhaling aerosol spray. Not that she is related to Lou Pearlman, but Nick and Aaron's sister Leslie died of an overdose in 2012. She was a singer with minor hits on the DreamWorks Records. Pearlman was featured in the 3rd season of American Greed on CNBC in the episode called Boy Band Mogul in 2009. The documentary, The Boy Band Con, The Lou Pearlman Story, premiered at South by Southwest on March 13, 2019. South by Southwest, abbreviated as SXSW and colloquially referred to as South by, is an annual conglomeration of parallel film, interactive media, and music festivals and conferences organized jointly that take place in mid-March and Austin, Texas. It began in 1987 and has continued to grow in both scope and size every year. In 2017, the conference lasted for 10 days, with the interactive tracking lasting for 5 days, music for 7 days, and film for 9. It was released on YouTube Premiere in April 2019. It was produced by NSYNC member Lance Bass. On December 13, 2019, Pearlman was the subject of an episode of ABC's 2020 titled The Hitman: From Pop to Prison. This episode was squeezed to perfection. First Few Squeezed is hosted and written by me, Sue Haley, and executive produced by Ebony. So thirsty and need more? Visit us at fstcpodcast.com for links to all our social media handles, including YouTube. Want to keep the juice flowing? Make a donation by buying us a glass. And as always, cheers.